So the next thing we're going to talk about just really quickly is whether or not emotions are good for us. We all have them. They're basic, they're evolved, right? But you could think about lines of argumentation that would say that experiencing passionate emotions is actually a really destructive thing. You see this, for instance, in Star Trek, where Spock, who is half Vulcan, comes from this species where they do not experience strong passions. In fact, they bully and mock Spock because he is half human, and so he does experience some of these impulses and feelings. And from the Vulcan perspective, this is leading him to be less logical, less rational, less capable of making good decisions or acting in a self-controlled way. So do you agree with this? Do you think we would all be better off if we didn't have such strong, passionate feelings? So before we dive into the answer to this question, I want you to think about the last time you felt a strong emotion. Pause this video, maybe take 30 seconds, a minute to write down some thoughts. How did this strong emotion help you deal with the situation, if any? Did it help you to come to a solution? In what ways might this emotion have been disruptive, unwanted, or unhelpful? Again, take 30 seconds to a minute to just think about the answers to these questions. So the best evidence that we have available as psychologists is that emotions actually are really important in helping us to adapt to everyday situations, really important in helping us take actions that are good for our survival. So I'm not going to embed this video because I think it would get me flagged on YouTube for stealing intellectual property, but right now I'd like you to go and watch the Antonio Damasio interview that I have linked on Moodle, all right? See you in a couple of minutes. So now that you're back from that Antonio Damasio video, seriously watch it, it's really good. If you haven't yet, go back and do it. Just to recap what Antonio Damasio was talking about. He is a neuroscientist and a doctor, and he has worked with patients who have different kinds of brain damage. In particular, he started seeing this syndrome of people who had some kind of lesion. Let's say they had a tumor that caused damage and it had to be extracted, right? Let's say they have a lesion for another reason. Damage to the regions of the brain that help us connect our basic emotional reactions, our basic emotional triggers to decision making. And that's parts of the brain like the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. So it's in these prefrontal executive centers. It's like right down there. It is not itself an emotion center, but it is connected to the emotion centers. So when you have impairment in your ability to take information from your amygdala and your hippocampus and these limbic system areas, when you cannot connect that to your more thoughtful decision making, people end up really screwed up in terms of how they approach everyday life. And in particular, what Damasio is talking about is patients who, after they had that damage, they kind of became zombies a little bit. They could not take quick, decisive action. They would linger for 30 minutes, an hour, over a decision that might take you or I 30 seconds. If you ask me what I want for lunch, I might think about the 5 things I have in my fridge. They might include mac and cheese, cold pizza, salad. I think about a salad. I have a little bit of pleasure because I think about how healthy that would be, but then I think about a pizza and I have even more pleasure because I think about how delicious and comforting that would be. And that more pleasure that's associated with the pizza allows me to make a very quick decision. All right, I'm gonna pop that in the microwave. These people can't take their immediate affective reactions and connect them to their decisions. So what do? They start weighing pros and cons. That might seem like a great way to make decisions, but they get stuck in it. They can never end the process. All right, so salad would be healthier. I think that has about blah, blah, blah calories and blah, blah, blah nutrients, but also pizza, I have a lot of it and I think I need to use it up. And I can't decide, right? So what does this suggest? It suggests that for typical people, neurotypical people like you or I, it is the emotional resonance of a decision that helps us to actually decide on something and act on it. Without that emotions, we're left paralyzed by indecision. So let's talk a little more specifically about how specific kinds of emotions are linked to specific kinds of behaviors and situations. And I'm going to take a specific case study. We're going to use this to explore how each basic category of emotion may be adaptive for certain sorts of situations. We're going to go all the way back to Charles Darwin, the, Mac Daddy of evolutionary theorists. And, he was also really interested in emotion. He talked about disgust as maybe originally having evolved in non-human mammals as a response to eating something toxic or unpleasant. So you think about a food that's really not good for you. Maybe it has a lot of alkaloids, it's really bitter, it's poisonous. You get a bit of that in your mouth, it tastes terrible, you stick your tongue out, you eject it physically, and it helps you prevent yourself from getting poisoned. We see this in humans really, really, really early. I'm going to show you two extremely cute examples.
Oh, I guess you don't like it.
All right, so babies do this. Babies do this not just when they're encountering foods that are bitter or could potentially be toxic. They encounter it just even with foods that are unfamiliar. They have that canonical disgust reaction. You see them actually physically often pushing their tongues out, which ejects food. All right, one more example. Ah.
Okay, baby, we're gonna try avocados.
Watch for it. And there it goes. So in that case, we actually see that set of motions with the mouth is successful in accomplishing the goal of ejecting the little mashed up bit of avocado from that baby's mouth. And of course, this is not unique to babies. These behaviors don't go away. So you can see how what we're seeing with the little kids translates to the adult disgust expression. You've got maybe the tongue gets sticking out. You've got the wrinkled up face, right? Maybe even, again, maybe that tongue sticking out. Well, it turns out that it's not just about food and toxins. Disgust may more broadly help us avoid diseases. So you think about the common categories of things that can trigger a really strong disgust response. They include stuff like rotten food, pests and parasites that themselves might be carriers of disease and bacteria. That's probably really unpleasant. I'll make it go away in just a second. And importantly, we feel disgust when we see signals that somebody else might be sick. So think about how it feels when you sit down on an airplane, pre-COVID times, and someone sits next to you and they're coughing, they're wheezing, or their nose is running. It's not just unpleasant and irritating, it's profoundly disgusting, right? So here's where things get interesting. Darwin's idea, an evolutionary theorist idea in general, is that nature likes to be parsimonious. Nature likes to be efficient. And so when it can, it will take older evolutionary adaptations and repurpose them for new classes of situations. So as we move from earlier primates and we get into being Homo sapiens sapiens, and we start to have more and more complex social structures, more and more complex, like let's say moral structures or cultural structures. That feeling of disgust that was originally oriented toward biological stimuli may have gotten refocused to also help us avoid social contamination. So think about it. The same disgust you feel when somebody who might be sick sits next to you is kind of linked to the sorts of feelings you have when you think about somebody who has engaged in really unethical or disapproved of behavior. People who we think of as morally sick. So you probably, at least, this face probably rings at least a little bit of a bell. This is Jeffrey Epstein, so the disgraced financier who has been accused of molesting dozens, if not hundreds, of young women on his private islands and private mansions. So the exact kind of behavior that our society thinks of as incredibly morally depraved. If you really have to think about Jeffrey Epstein, you probably start to feel a queasy feeling in your stomach. This applies to lots of different emotions, not just disgust. So disgust is about avoiding contamination, at least in theory. Anger, for instance, might be about overcoming obstacles or people who are preventing you from doing what you want to do. Sadness might be about situations where you have to grieve something you've lost. Joy might be about recognizing that there are opportunities in a situation, becoming very exploratory, becoming very open, and really trying to gain new resources or discover new potential avenues. So it's not just about disgust. Emotions in general seem to have these very functional relationships to helping us deal with different categories of common situations. I'll leave you with that, and I'll see you in our second video for the week. Bye, folks.